I'm going to just turn this full screen. Hopefully, if there is anybody live, we can see the comments, or we will aim to see the comments. Aha, there we go. Hello, guys. Welcome. Thank you for having me here, Dom, Samantha, for organising this. I appreciate it. I'm here. I've been teaching today in a salon not very far from where I am, in Payton, and we're here with one of the lovely stylists, Beth, and she's kindly agreed to let me cut her hair. So when I taught here last time, I kind of spotted Beth's hair because she's got really cool haircut, really cool look, and I wanted to kind of maybe use her as a model for a live. So this is a really nice opportunity for me to do something a little bit creative, but in a salon friendly commercial kind of way. So what we want to do today, I'll spin her around so you can kind of see what we have going on here. So we've got a kind of lot of length at the back here. So we've got almost that kind of mullety wolf cut type shape. Hey Janet, how you doing? So we've got a long length at the back, and we want to maintain all this length. That is kind of really essential to us. We've also got these longer areas at the sides, which I know you can't see super clearly, but I will zoom in as I'm working. So this is going to be disconnected area also to keep some length. So around the disconnected areas of length that we've sectioned away, we are working with shorter panels in the sides and a shorter zone in the top. So my aim here is to create a shorter, flatter shape. As this haircut has grown out, it's kind of lost its shape and got a little bit longer and flatter through the top, and therefore making it really difficult for Beth to style it and manage it and do anything with it. So we're just going to look to give that some more texture with some shorter lengths, and then we're going to create a shorter, flatter shape through the sides with some shorter outline around the ear, but against the longer disconnected length at the front and of course in the back. So the contrast between long and short is going to be really nice and give it some strength with some softness at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to try to zoom in. Hey Viv, how you doing? I'm going to zoom in as I'm working so that you can see a little clearer what we're doing. But for now, I'll just leave the camera there while I section off. So I want to make this, as you can see, with all the kind of disconnected areas, longer lengths, shorter lengths. For us, when we're teaching and educating, that could be something that can be deemed as maybe a little bit complicated for people. And what I want to show you is that it can be done in a really simple, really easy, effective way. So we're going to just create a nice little section here in the center on the top where we're going to cut our original length. So I'm just going to zoom in now with the camera. The sectioning has made a very nice little look there, I've got to tell you. All right, so we're going to start the haircut in the top of the center. Okay, so my guide length at the front, I'm going to take in the center. I'm going to drop down a small piece of my first section, and I'm going to use that as a guide. Okay, I'm just going to take this small piece down. I'm allowing that hair to sit in its natural fall. And we're just going to trim the length to the desired length that we want this to be. Now we might pinch this a little bit shorter after, that's totally no problem, but we're going to just aim to use this as a guide for our layering through the top. Can anyone watching Viv, can you just let me know if you can hear me okay? That would be amazing. I've got headphones in that are connected to the laptop, so hopefully the sound is okay. But I would be grateful for some feedback on that. So once I've got my original guide in the front, what I'm going to do is work with this central section, combing the hair directly out from the head. Until I get the guide in the front of the section. And then I'm going to use a point cutting technique to work through and create my layering. Now, the reason I'm using a point cutting technique is just to encourage some movement and softness in the line and allow that hair a little bit of freedom. Okay, as I work towards the back of the section, I'm moving my hand position backwards, which again is allowing me to follow the head shape and create a round cutting line that mirrors the shape of the head. Okay. Hi, Jacqueline. Thanks, Janet. You can hear me. That's good. Perfect. So, section 2, I'm taking on the side nearest to me. I'm combing section 1 towards section number 2. So my guideline is traveling towards my new section, still creating a round cutting line and still making sure that my finger position comes directly out from the head. Okay. One thing you can also notice here with Beth's hair is her color is grown out somewhat, and she's going to be having it done again soon. But at this point now, there is quite a bit of root. And what I don't want to do, we already kind of pre-talked about this, is I don't want to cut the length so short that I'm left with just dark hair, because it's something to bear in mind with a client. Of course, you would want them maybe to have cut and color together, but if not, the one thing I don't want to do is leave all this length of blonde hair and cut this so short that it's just dark. And then that's going to kind of create a look that doesn't quite follow what I'm trying to achieve, maybe makes the client view the haircut differently based on how the color appears and things like that. So those things are really important to me. As I'm working now around to my third section, I'm slightly pivoting from the crown into the front. Okay. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to follow the shape of the head with my sections, making sure that I continue to work round from the head. And if I was to take my sections vertically, I could still do that, but it makes it harder from a body posture perspective. So I'm just pivoting around. I'm working my shape into the front, following my guide from section 2. Then I move section 2 out of the way, and I'm left with 3 and 4 here on the side of the head. So we then are combing 3 towards section 4 and following the same shape. Again, I'm slightly adjusting the head position in order to help me from a body posture perspective and following the shape all the way into the front hairline. Okay. So you can see that nice little silhouette starting to appear where the length is starting to sit really nicely on this side. And then we're going to repeat the process on the other side. Okay, so I turn around. So I'm moving myself around to make sure it's easier from a body positioning perspective. And I'm controlling the length because I'm combing the guide towards me, towards the new section of hair. One thing I want to do is when I'm cutting the hair is I'm combing it towards my body, which enables me to have full control over that section as I'm working. So as I mentioned before, guys, for those of you that weren't here, we've been teaching today here in this salon in Paignton in Devon, which is not very far from me, which is always a nice treat to be local. And the ladies have kindly let us use their salon to do our live education. So big up Sarah, who's not here. She's gone home. But hence why we're in a bit of a different environment to where we were last time we did a live. So now, again, the process is the same. I'm combing section 2 towards section 3, and we are cutting the hair. I'm just gently tilting Beth's head over the other way to make sure again that I can keep my posture better and my back nice and straight, and always making sure I can see the guide as I work through. Pivoting around, as we said before, from the crown. And then cutting the hair to the guide. Okay? So if anybody does, again, I appreciate the timing of today's live is then maybe a little early for some people. But if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to ask. Questions are always really helpful because they allow us to just explain what everyone's feeling and thinking. Right, we can see the shape here is really nice now. It's starting to sit nicely. I kind of like this little bit of separation we've got going on here in the center at the fringe, and it's working really well. And my next zone that I'm going to work on is going to be the 2 side zones. So you can see here we've got this sectioned away to be disconnected and keep the length. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to work this side panel and be cutting my length here so that we can fit the shape in to the head and make it so it's slightly flatter. Okay, so currently we have some areas that fall into the back from this section I've taken, and some areas of kind of excess length, which is making the shape have a little bit more width. So what I'm going to do is I'll turn the hair and Beth around this way so you can see it from this angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my guide from my final section on the top. I'm going to cut the hair so that we're now starting to fit it in to the shorter area we're going to create around the ear. So at this point now, I'm using some graduation. So when we talked originally about the sectioning to make this a simpler process, this is some of the reason why, because on the top zone, zone number 1, you saw I was using a layering technique. So round layering from the head. On the 2 side zones, we're using graduation because we want the shape to be fitted into the head shape, be a little bit flatter. Of course, I know graduation is going to build some weight here, but I'm choosing my length accordingly to know that it's going to sit flatter and kind of collapse the shape in. But I also want to cut this round the ears. So if I was to cut it rounded or squarer, then I would have too much length at the bottom. So that's why I'm using a graduated technique, but also separating it into these 2 different zones, or 3, both sides and the top, allows me to treat those zones separately and manage them separately. So it just prevents confusion. So I have one more section here that isn't clipped out the way. So the hair that's clipped out the way, we are leaving and ignoring. I'm using the guide from the top again, and then fitting the shape in accordingly. Just going to spin around a bit more. Just going to cross check also before I continue into the very front. Okay, good. So I'm just, as I'm cross-checking here, what I'm checking for is to make sure that my shape is consistent throughout. The length hasn't increased as I come towards the front because I want to maintain that shortness into the very front to get the contrast between the short around the ears and the disconnected area in the front hairline. Okay, so my shape here is sitting flatter. I'm going to release this, but I'm not cutting any more hair here. So again, from a client perspective, when you talk about these things in the beginning, of course, you know, Beth and I have talked about her hair a little bit, but I've never cut her hair before. So she's maybe a bit scared. But the contrast between length, like this length is really important to her. So me clipping it out of the way lets her know that I've listened to what she said. I'm understand we want that longer and I'm not cutting it. Okay, so we're leaving it until the end. I probably will cut a little bit because otherwise it's too extreme, but at least she knows. And the same when we do our clients, that it's important to understand that we're listening to what they're wanting us to do. I'm now going to finish this off by cutting this hair around the ear, but again, leaving the length in the front. Okay, that's really important. So connecting around the ear, so cutting this hair shorter on the outline. Moving obviously her ear around to allow me to just get in behind. And again, using a gentle little bit of point cutting just to create that nice soft outline. Okay. And then the very front, we're going to leave. And I am going to cut it, but we're not going to cut it yet. Okay. So we're just going to come and do the same the other side. When I do this side, from a body position perspective, I want to make sure that I'm still stood in a position that's comfortable to me. So I'm tilting her head a little bit towards me, combing the hair out from the head, using the short point from my top section as a guide, and graduating the shape in. Okay, so we're graduating the shape in. When you're working with short hair, sometimes it's difficult to maintain and work with clean, neat sections. So one thing I would say is if that is a struggle or something you're struggling with, then a couple of bits of advice that would be beneficial are to keep the hair really sprayed down is number one, to make the section sizes that I'm choosing a little bit smaller, number two, and just to slowly work through my shape. And if I have any doubt at all about the section I'm taking and working with my guide from the previous section, so if I have any doubt at all where I can't see the guide clearly, then we don't cut the hair. We work back to our previous section. And what we do is we make sure that the section is fine enough, enabling me to see the guide nice and clearly. Okay. I'm working through this with my vertical sections, combing the hair out, making sure I can see the guide, and cutting the hair in so it's shorter around the ears. Last section, I just pick it up first, and this time I'm combing this slightly backwards, as we did on the other side, away from the front, to A, maintain a bit of length, but also to make sure I don't cut any off my protected area at the front. Same as I did the other side now, I'm just going to cross check. I've got a nice balanced, consistent shape. Releasing the clip carefully. And then we are going to shape the hair around the ear. Okay. So working only with the hair that is already short, using a point cutting technique to just gently create that softness and making sure that we leave and protect all that length in the front. Okay, so throwing away the comb. It's always good when you're live teaching. Okay, pick the comb up. Wash the comb, he says. See? Can't go wrong with a bit of live TV, can you? Can't hide it. Wash the comb, essential. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the back. So, mission of the back is to give some more shape, prevent this hair from being too flat here, but to maintain all of the length. Now, when you're doing these sorts of shapes, one thing that's quite important is making sure that you don't it's all right, no way. I'll just move it forward slightly. Sure? It's all good, mate. It's all good. I'm trying to tip you up and yeah. Nah, you're all right, you're all good. So one thing that's really important is to make sure, for me anyway, that although this is disconnected and although we want to maintain length, I want this to visually connect. And I want this to make sure that visually it has some balance to it, even though it's kind of disconnected and it's got that really nice, long, wispy feel to it, right? So I'm going to start in the center back. And effectively what we're doing here is layering through the back, but elevating the hair from the bottom to make sure we maintain all of the length. Okay, so again, this doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It needs to be a nice, simple process, but somewhere along the line, I need to connect to my short length up here. Okay, so I'm going to lift the camera slightly because the length looks to be not quite in shot, he says. Just loosen this handle. Okay, better. So the length that I have up here, okay, so this is my guide length from the front and the top section. And then I want to connect this length to it. Okay, so we comb the hair up. And I'm combing this hair up towards the section on the top. So effectively, I'm cutting a squarer shape now, as in my line is square. The shape isn't square from the head, but the line I'm cutting is square. So I'm over directing and elevating all of this hair up so that we've got this nice shape until now you can see I've reached a really long point. Okay, again, just going to zoom out a little at this point, just to make sure that you get a good view of what we're doing here, right? So this excess length is now the point that's starting to make up my outline. One thing I don't want to do is be cutting this too short, but I do want to create a connection. So I will try to show you this as clearly as I can and hope that the camera picks up enough detail. But I'll explain it as well and hope that the two combined work in the way that I want them to. When I comb this hair up from the very bottom of the section, what you can see is the outline length here, okay, is roughly sort of an inch outside of the length of my fingers. And this length here, in between my short layer and my outline, is longer. So you can see this hair is longer than the outline length when I have it held at this angle. What I'm looking to do is create a little connection between those 2 points. So keeping the outline length, I have to change the angle of my finger position. Okay, so we're keeping the outline length, and I angle my fingers and therefore cut my line on an angle so it connects to the shorter point whilst maintaining all the length in the bottom. And once I've done that central section, spin back round, I'm going to pivot from here. Okay. I pivot round and I'm going to change my body position because I'm over directing this hair back towards the previous section. So we're coming back towards the previous section. Okay, the reason you can see the over direction here in the camera from this angle. Okay, so you can see my hair is being pulled from here towards the previous section. The reason I'm over directing it back to the previous section is because remember when I cut the hair really short around the ears? I want to create an area in there where I maintain all this length. So I'm ignoring the short area as the guide, and I'm coming around and using my guide from originally the top and now the center back section. And this is making sure that as I come into my final section on the side here, and I over direct it back, I'm going to keep all of this length. So I'm over directing it away from the hairline. Okay, I'm over directing it away from where it wants to fall naturally and elevating it up, which is going to, of course, layer the hair, but make sure I remove the weight from that middle band, which we talked about, whilst maintaining length on the outline. Because we're pulling that hair on the outline so far that even connecting it in, it still enables me to leave all that length. Now, there may be some areas once the hair is dry that I have to either point cut into to give texture, I have to soften by maybe slide cutting, slicing, anything like that as a texturizing technique or a variation of. But the principles are that by using layering and over direction elevation, I'm maintaining length here because I'm pulling the hair away from where it falls naturally. Hopefully that's nice and clear and simple. For anyone that has seen anything we've done before on here on platform or anywhere else, you'll know that with my education, my mission is to keep it as simple as possible. So if anybody doesn't understand me waffling on, then please feel free to ask any questions because I want to try to simplify this process as much as we can, right? This is potentially like a slightly different shape to what I've done before on here, but I wanted to show that we can create what originally seemed to be complex haircuts really simply by breaking them down, by understanding the different zones that we're working on, and just by managing those lengths and those techniques that we're using within each zone. So to summarize while I'm finishing this section off, so I'm now still over directing the hair back to my previous section, combing the hair right up, making sure that I angle my fingers so that I'm not cutting anything from my outline or my external shape, but I'm connecting it to the shorter hair in my layer section. Okay. Then final section coming up, maybe two more here. So combing the hair right the way up. Again, keeping all the length on the outline and just taking away what the length was is in this kind of middle band here where there was that excess weight and excess length. So we're just removing that. And then my final section, combing all the way up, again, over directing and elevating and connecting it in to the center. Okay. So We have a couple of tweaks now to make before we dry. And one is this excess length in the front that we left originally. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come through and just very gently, leaving this overall length, just very, very gently take the tiny little ends away, just by using a kind of almost sliding technique. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the hair in my fingers with the wide tooth of the comb, starting at the shortest point from my internal shape. And I'm just going to very gently use the heel of the blade and just slide my scissors down. So this is just going to create some connection from the internal shape to the outline. Okay. But again, whilst maintaining all the length. We're being really careful as we're doing this to cut very, very little off because we want to maintain all that length and that softness. The other thing as well here, guys, is as this hair's drying, you'll notice that I'm occasionally kind of combing it into place. And that's because I don't want to, when I dry this, I want to keep it quite soft and quite natural. And I don't want to have to over dry and over style. So I'm just allowing it to fall in its position where I want it to. And by continuing to put it there as it's drying, it's going to enable me less work when I dry the hair. Okay. So same on this side. Comb the hair down. Just take off any tiny little ends. First of all. And then we take the internal shape. We comb the hair out using the wide part of the comb, using the internal shape as the guide, the heel of the blade to just gently connect in from short to long. Again, I'm rather than cutting too much off, I'm like leaving this because we can always cut it shorter, okay? And it's the same with the back. At this stage, I'm not doing anything to the length of the back because I know that she wants to keep all the length. Condition-wise, the hair is healthy. We are looking for it to look kind of wispy and soft, and so I don't really want to cut it for the sake of cutting it. But you can start to see by changing the shape a little how removing the weight has allowed the natural movement and texture of the hair to kind of come to life a little bit, and it's starting to form that real soft shape that we want. All right. So I'm going to dry it now. I'm going to apply a little bit of product. In terms of product application, I want to keep this really simple. Okay. So we're going to use a tiny little bit of like a salt spray just to give it some texture. So the brand that I work with is a brand called Davro. It's an Australian brand, and all the products in the range are like vegan friendly and kind of naturally derived ingredients. However, that doesn't mean to say that they don't do a job and they don't have enough about them to do what we need them to do. So you definitely wouldn't want to overspray this salt spray because it can, vegan or not, it is pretty powerful spray. You definitely don't want to spray it in her eye like I might have just done. Okay, so a little spritz of that. And then in terms of drying, I'm going to use some of the clips that I've been using for cutting to just flatten one or two areas. So we're just going to kind of use these clips just to flatten here. I'm also going to use it to create a bit of texture in the sides. So just kind of create a bit of a twist in here, if you like. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. We're just flattening the top, and then I'm going to use a diffuser to dry most of the hair, because what I want is for it to be super soft and natural, and also encouraging that natural movement. I'm actually going to take, I really like how this side is kind of doing its own thing, so I'm going to take the clip out the other side because I've decided that it's going to be better without. I'm just going to read this comment. That's such a good tip, Cheryl. I don't know which one you mean, but thank you. That's very kind. So, diffuser, very kind of gentle diffusing. So medium speed, low heat. That's got fairly fine texture. She's got quite a lot of hair, but a fine texture. So we don't want to over dry and kind of make it fly all over the place, right? So I'm just diffusing this hair. At the back, I'm encouraging more movement. So I'm lifting the hair into the diffuser to encourage more movement and more curl. And then through the top, it's about making it flatter, but still with natural movement. Okay, so I'm just going to turn around also read that comment. Putting the clips in before you dry. Yeah, these clips work really well, Cheryl, and they're really good in terms of drying and styling lots of variations of haircuts. But one thing we're finding is, clients want their hair to have lots more natural movement. They want to encourage the movement in their hair. They want to like go with it, encourage it, allow it to be softer and more feminine, but by the same token, not wanting it to be kind of massive and have like too much body or too much volume, right? So this is that perfect go-between. You're almost using them like a good old-fashioned pin curl to move the hair around and set it where you want to set it, and encourage it to have that nice freedom and softness that you want. Because the only area that I really care about being flat is this front bit, so that I can get all lots of texture through here. But I want this front bit to kind of sit nice and flat for a minute until I've cut it, and then I can see what it's doing. So it's drying nice and quickly, which is good. And what I'm going to do in a second is probably potentially take the diffuser off and just encourage it to move a bit more, but we'll see how it moves as we're going. But you can see as well, as I'm working, I'm moving the hair around. I'm not trying to over style. I'm not necessarily brushing the hair, but yeah, just trying to move it around and allow it to have that freedom that we've created with the haircut. Uh, you're welcome, Cheryl. Those clips, if you haven't got them already or haven't seen them, is you can get them on eBay. Like you can get them anywhere, right? Lots of companies doing them now, and um, without naming names, lots of companies charging quite a lot of money for them. But on eBay or Amazon or whatever, like plastic, I don't know if you type in like session styling clips or makeup clips, but they're really cheap, really cheap. Like you should be able to get a packet really cheap. All right, so yeah, eBay, Amazon, they work really well, but they're good fun to play with. You can start to see now the texture of the hair coming to life. It's starting to have a little bit more freedom, a little bit more movement. That's got great hair for this look. It's literally like perfect for it, right? And again, she's already had her hair in this shape, cut by her boss, and it was already a really cool haircut. So, like, I didn't really have a great deal of work to do. I can't lie to you, but it just is encouraging more of that texture and more of that movement within the shape, and just maybe tweaking one or two areas, which is less about them needing it, but more about personal opinion and personal taste, I guess. Uh, Jacqueline, yeah, Amazon wins. Anywhere you like, Amazon or eBay, but you can get them anywhere. But I use them a lot with styling now. These clips. The temperature, okay. Yeah. So you can start to see the shape kind of come to life now. Beth can start to see it come to life. You can stop holding her breath now, worrying that if I've got too much off. If she's not in front of a mirror. It's a little bit disconcerting as a hairdresser to have your haircut and not be sat in front of a mirror, keeping an eye on somebody. So we're just starting to finish this off now. I am making sure that this is nice and dry. I don't want to leave any hair damp or anything like that, because actually that almost fluffy kind of texture is what I'm trying to create, and that's what we want it to look like. Is that real undone vibe? Um, real soft, real kind of grungy feel to it. I don't want it to be, definitely don't want it to be too set or done looking or anything like that. That's not the look we're going for. Any more questions would be amazing, like about anything we've done. I'll recap the shape while I'm drying, shall I? So we've split this haircut into multiple zones. And the reason I've done that is to make it manageable and easy and make it so that you can kind of understand how we've treated each zone. So the top kind of zone from the crown, slightly triangular into around the kind of temple area, we have cut round from the head, and I took pivoting sections. So they started centrally and then pivoted around the head, making sure that we continue to keep that round shape here to make it fit in nicely to the head shape. Then on the sides here, we had this kind of another, if you like, little triangular panel from here, where we kept this long piece disconnected, but we graduated this shape. So we've got round layering through the top, graduation through both sides with this disconnection. And then at the back here, we combed all of this hair up, initially to connect to the short point with a kind of square line, and then slightly angled our fingers further towards the outline to make sure we kept all that length. Okay, so that's just a little recap. I've also used the point cutting technique throughout, and that's going to make sure that it's helping me to encourage all of this texture that we want and that we're getting and that you're seeing as we're working through. Let me just scroll down to see if there's any more questions. No, not at the moment. Great. Anybody as well that does watch this back on replay or watches it back whenever they're super bored, then ask any questions and as long as you tag me in them, I will definitely I'll get back to you. All right. So remove my little clips because they've done their job now and they've just encouraged this hair to be nice and flat in the front. Okay, so we've got this really cool little shape, right? Short on the top, flatter in here, and then with all of this really nice little length on the sides. So now is about tweaking and personalizing and just making final adjustments. So there aren't tons of adjustments to make, but there are some. There's always some, right? Wouldn't be hairdressers if there were none, would we? So I'm going to start in the same place I started my haircut. This time using the wide part of the comb and just very gently point cutting through my shape just to make sure I'm softening the line. So effectively what I'm doing is I'm creating some space within the outline to allow the hair to have more movement and allow it to have a little bit more freedom. So keeping my scissors parallel to the hair, making sure we don't cut too much hair out. And just softening the line to allow that hair to have even more fluidity and even more movement, okay? As I follow it round into the sides, I'm just kind of continuing to pivot around and doing the same thing, right? Making sure that I'm happy with the flow of the shape. I'll just try to show you, hopefully you can see this clear enough. See this area here where it's slightly heavier, right? I'm just like, this is the areas that visually we're looking at right now, and just point cutting through so that when they fall, they flow really nicely. And then once I've done all the internal shape and I'm happy with how that's behaving, I'm refining the long piece here. So I'm going to do that with a kind of sliding technique just to encourage a little bit more movement. But you'll notice that I'm not sliding all the way down to the ends because, again, I want to keep length. I don't want this to be too short. We're just pinching tiny little bit off the outline, but keeping that length so it's got that kind of accentuated, like disconnected vibe. And the same in the back here. We're just refining around the ear, but not coming into this length. So this length is completely disconnected, but in order to give it some kind of visual connection and softness, we're just going to work from internal shape to outline using a little bit of a sliding technique just to give it a little bit more of that softness. And then lastly, remembering how we cut the sides graduated short and the back elevated up, there's obviously going to be a disconnect and an area between the two. So we've got an area here. I'll try to stand this side so you can see clearer. But we've got an area here of length on the sides. This is from the back here, where we elevated the section up to cut it. And of course, our shorter are in the front. So what I'm going to do is come across the two and just use a deep point cutting technique. So not to connect every part of that hair, but to make sure that, again, visually, it's got some connection and it doesn't feel like those two areas of shape don't work together. Okay, I was just like throwing combs around tonight. This time I'm going to get a completely different one because I've already dried the hair, right? So that connection is just made it have that little bit more softness and blend between the back and the sides. That is the one thing to bear in mind when you're working with different areas of length within one haircut, is that somewhere along the line they have to look like, well, in my opinion, anyway, not everybody's, I'm sure, but they have to look deliberate. And I want this to have flow and have that kind of freedom. Like you can see when you comb this hair up, look, it all just sits perfectly. But what I don't want is for there to be these kind of obvious areas that don't flow and don't work. So that's where it comes into play, where we make these kind of adjustments in the final phases of the haircut to make sure that the shape works wherever it's going to fall, right? Because one thing you can guarantee, less so for Beth, because of course she's a hairdresser, but for a client, if you were to do a creative shape like this, one thing is for certain is styling wise, they need it to be easy, manageable. It needs to be something that wherever they put it is going to work really well. Okay. And if we don't do this part correctly, where we are connecting visually and making sure the shape flows in all directions, then we could potentially cause ourselves a problem. All right. So I'm now just working through the back in the same way, combing the hair up and just point cutting through the shape. Mostly, I have to be honest, through the top part. So mostly through the area of hair above the occipital bone, because this is the area of hair that has more density, and the area below the occipital bone is an area that doesn't have too much density to it and is quite soft already. Okay, so I don't need to be stressing too much about taking lots of weight from the bottom because it's already got that kind of wispy soft feel that I want. All right. So of course, again, depending on the client, depending on the look, you could use a product to you could use a product, or you could use irons or tongs or whatever to create a bit more defined curl here or something like that. But that's not something that we're trying to do. We want it to be softer. But it is an option should you wish. So the last thing I'm going to do to finish off this side before I repeat that process the other side is just come through the fringe area. Just gently use like a chipping technique to refine the outline. So the difference, I guess, in point cutting and chipping is the motion. Okay, so point cutting is a deeper motion where I'm creating more of a softness and a deliberate kind of difference in the line. And chipping is almost like a small triangular motion so that we're making sure that we still get a fairly clean line to finish, but it still just has that little bit of softness to it. And then lastly, just this final little bit of kind of slide cutting, slice cutting, whatever terminology you want to use, just on the very outline of the fringe to make it flow with that extra little bit of softness. Okay, so now we're going to repeat on the other side. Uh, you have to go, Jacqueline. Don't apologize. Thank you for joining. But you definitely don't need to say sorry for leaving. That's very nice, though. So we're just repeating the process on the other side of the head. Starting in the center at the top, using my point cutting technique to create the kind of space, if you like, in the shape and to enable this hair to move more freely. Sorry. Okay. Then as we did on the other side, I'm kind of pivoting round into the sides, repeating the process as best I can to make sure that we have consistency between where I'm removing the kind of weight from where it needs it. But with that in mind, also, one thing that I do have to think about or take into consideration is I'm taking the weight from the areas that visually look like they need it, right? So this is not necessarily going to be the same on both sides of the head because there might be lots of differences, such as the natural movement of the hair, such as the density of hair, the growth patterns, like all these things might differ from one side of the head to the other. So we're treating each side as its own entity and making sure that we're only removing weight or we're only point cutting where it needs it. This is not like a I must do the same as the other side because it doesn't work like that necessarily. Okay. But if it needs it, I'm combing the hair out in the same way. I'm point cutting just to soften the shape. And then one of the other things we did on the other side, if we remember, is we came across the sections from back to front. We just created a slightly softer connection between the back and the front, making sure that visually, although technically they don't connect, visually they do. Okay. When I say that as well, guys, the visual connection or technically connected, the difference that I'm alluding to there is like from a technical point of view, if it's connected, it's when you pull the hair up from each of these sections and they are actually connected, as in the lengths are the same and they connect. And then when I talk about which I have been a little bit about visual connection. I'm talking about, although we've got areas of shortness here and length, that as a shape, when we look at it, like I'm looking at it in the camera now, like visually it connects and it flows and it's got that softness. It doesn't, yes, it looks long against short, but at these points where the hair meet long and short, it doesn't look like it's odd, or it doesn't look like it's not meant to be. So let me take this area of hair, for example. This area of hair looks slightly like it's not meant to be. So what I'm going to do is take a section horizontally across here, comb this hair up, and again, use a pointing technique just to connect a little more visually. Now, it's not actually the same length, it's not actually connected, but it does make it look connected. Okay, hopefully that makes sense now, the difference between the two things that I'm talking about. Right, if you also remember rightly, the final thing we did on the other side is just tweak our cool little long pieces. And then we did the same in the back also. Okay. Now the final couple of things we're going to do, we're just going to get back to tilt our head forward ever so slightly, thank you. And then all I'm going to do is, although I'm keeping all the length, I'm just going to dust off some of the baseline. You can't see it when I turn that around now. I'm just going to dust off a tiny bit of the baseline, not to blunt it off or sharpen it, but just to literally allow her hair to grow, because she wants this to be a little bit longer, long term, and have that more contrast. So this is literally just dusting it off to make it healthy, to allow it to grow, right? Because we all know that hair needs that. Even us hairdressers know that. Okay, so finishing up now, final finishing touches, outlines, checking my shape thoroughly. So this one tonight was a bit different from what I would normally do, because a lot of the stuff I've done before has been maybe a little more classic, potentially deemed to be a little more commercial. Now, you could argue this is commercial because Beth, although a hairdresser, is still a client and wants a haircut, but it's definitely something that is really cool shape, really good fun for us to do. And I really kind of, I guess from the minute I came here last time when I was teaching them, I thought I'd love to cut your hair. So it's actually just been really good fun for me to do this. The final thing I'm doing here, just in case you're wondering whilst I'm talking and waffling on, is I'm just coming through And again, just sliding down with the scissors from short to long, because I just feel like I've got, where I've elevated that hair so much, which is what I wanted to keep, all the outline length, I've still got a little bit of heaviness, if you like, from where it is short to length at the bottom. So I'm just softening again the difference between the short hair up here and the longer hair towards the outline. Okay. So when we styled the hair before it was wet to dry, I used like a salt spray. So with a salt spray, as we already know, it's going to give texture. It's going to give the hair that sort of grittiness, that volume, that body. And now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to contrast that and use a tiny little bit of like an argan oil, which is going to give the hair a bit of a shine, a bit of a gloss, but also give this kind of longer length and definition. Okay. Just use a tiny little bit of this. And I start in the outline and the longer lengths. And I'm kind of scrunching the product into the hair. So I'm still encouraging it to have that same movement that we did before. And then just with my fingertips, where I've only got a tiny bit of product, I'm working it through the top and the longer area into the front hairline. Okay, so we're just encouraging this to have a bit of glossiness, taking maybe that tiny little bit of fluffiness away, but still keeping that kind of grungy feel to it so that it doesn't feel overdone and over styled, because that's just not a look that we want to go for. All right. I don't know if anybody is still live. I don't know if any of you are still watching here, but if you're watching back, if anybody is watching on replay, feel free to ask any questions, to ping over any questions. And hopefully you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed doing it. But here you can see the finished shape. So we've got this kind of real cool kind of mullety vibe with the disconnected pieces in the front hairline, the disconnection and kind of long lengths at the back, and really kind of nice kind of grungy feel to it, but whilst having this structure and all this texture on the top where Beth can kind of mess it around and allow it to be free. And thank you very much. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Cheryl. Appreciate it. What's the cut called? Your guess is as good as mine. Call it what you make up a name, Cheryl, and you decide. But it's got a bit of a mullety vibe to it. Like, could argue it's a bit kind of that wolf cut type vibe. Like, personally, for me, like, I know we need to be in touch with the names of haircuts because of our clients, because people are looking online and Instagram and Pinterest for inspiration. But for me, you know, it's less with this, right? Because this is definitely more of a mullety type haircut. But often with these haircuts, you know, like butterfly cut, shag cut, they're all just layered haircuts. They're just layered haircuts. Now we need to know the names to relate to our clients. We did a live before with Samantha where we talked about some of these looks and how to decode them and go about creating them. But this is effectively a mullet type shape, but it's a combination of techniques, right? Layering, graduation. So obviously we've got some disconnected areas, but effectively, yeah, let's go with mullet, shall we? But I hope you like it. I hope everybody has a good evening. Thank you for joining. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.